Number 5. The Spook Light. In the early 1830s, when the Native Americans were put on their forced march during the Trail of Tears, some of them reported seeing something unusual while near Missouri and Oklahoma's border. Something that has remained a consistent part of American folklore and a relatively commonly reported sight ever since. While the Native Americans were passing through an area known as the Devil's Promenade, they apparently saw a glowing orb of light that was floating in the distance. Sometimes it's reported as being the size of a baseball, and other times as being the size of a basketball. Sometimes it remains stationary as it hovers in the night, and sometimes it appears to vibrate and twitch in the air. Explanations have included tales of two Native American lovers searching for each other in the night, the ghost of a Confederate soldier, and even the devil himself wandering the earth with a lantern. It has gone by many names, such as the Joplin Spook Light, the Hornet Spook Light, the Hollis Light, and the Devil's Jack-o'-lantern. The site of the Spook Light has become somewhat of a tourist attraction, with the area being especially popular around Halloween. But though scientists have speculated that it could be the result of a natural gas leak or car lights reflecting off a nearby river, this does not explain the dozens of sightings that occurred before the invention of the automobile. What if the cause of this floating orb is not the spirit of some lost soul trying to find their way home, but the manifestation of extraterrestrial activity? We've all heard plenty of stories of glowing orbs in the sky that have gotten closer and turned out to be starships from outer space. The Spook Light could perhaps actually be one of these unidentified flying objects. If you subscribe to the theory that aliens have not made direct contact with us because they are studying our species, it would make sense that this light would first appear during a major historical event where millions of displaced native peoples were forced into long marches. Perhaps the sightings since then have been follow-up studies of the area by aliens. If that is the case, and aliens were observing Earth during the Trail of Tears, let's hope they don't judge us for some of our most shameful behavior. Number 4. Funnel Ghosts. Tell me if this tale sounds familiar. A couple moves into an old house. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but they believe they can put in the work and make it a home. They live there for a while, but when night falls, they take a photo and see something they don't expect. Not the typical idea of a ghost where the spirit looks like a past human, perhaps with a transparent appearance, but what is known as a funnel ghost. These spirits are often described as being swirling wisps or spirals of light that often appear in photos or videos, with little to no explanation. Often, when these funnel ghosts are seen, they are believed to be past loved ones or former residents of the home come back to say hello. But maybe these wisps are really visitors from another planet. If aliens are real, they clearly do their best to remain as hidden as possible from humanity. This would explain why UFO sightings are rarely reported in crowded, well-lit areas, and why they don't tend to be active on social media. Despite alien abduction stories where people are taken away to be studied and probed by our alien visitors, if you really wanted to study humans, it would be much more informative to study them in their natural environments. Obviously, little green men running around your home and watching you while you and your family eat would be suspicious. So maybe they've developed a way to hide in plain sight. An advanced species capable of interstellar travel and with spacecraft that are rarely seen by human eyes and hardly ever captured with any clarity on film could be using some kind of technology that reflects ambient light in order to keep them invisible. If we assume this technology is used to hide their ships, it is not unreasonable to hypothesize that this technology could be available for aliens on the ground. The strange shapes appearing in photos that we assume are ghosts are actually aliens studying us in our own homes, using a cloaking device to remain undetected and only being seen when a camera picks up their telltale shimmer. Number 3. Sightings at the West Point Lighthouse in PEI. When it comes to lists of spooky and probably haunted locations, lighthouses are surely near the top of the list, just under murder houses, ancient manors, and abandoned mental hospitals. Such is the case for our next entry. a lighthouse on the west point of the Canadian province of Prince Edward Island. The lighthouse was built in 1876, being passed from keeper to keeper until the operation was automated in 1963. The lighthouse was renovated into an inn, museum, craft shop, and chowder kitchen in the mid-1980s, and has been the source of tales of the supernatural ever since. Visitors often report rather stereotypical ghost activity, such as lights turning on and off, disembodied voices, and cold spots, sending a shiver up guests' spines. More interesting for the purposes of this list are the tales of a ghostly burning ship being seen in the nearby Northumberland Strait. Legend says that at night, sometimes if you look out to sea, you can see a centuries-old ship whose crew were killed when their ship caught fire and sank. According to the tale, they made a deal with the devil in order to save themselves, and as a result are damned to burn on the ship for all of eternity. From the distance that the people who reported this burning ship would be from the boat, they wouldn't be able to make out with much detail on the apparition, especially at night when the ship appears in the vast majority of reported sightings. So, all they would really be seeing is a large, bright, flickering light coming towards the lighthouse that, through the context of the situation, they would assume was a ship. But it makes me think, there are so many stories of UFOs appearing as bright, shining, flickering lights that disappear just as soon as they appear. What if this burning ghost ship is actually an alien craft signaling with its lights? You may think, why would an alien ship be signaling anyone? But look at the situation from their perspective. You're flying around in your flying saucer above the waters of Canada. You see another bright floating light in the distance. You signal to let it know you are there, and when you get close enough to realize that it is not another alien craft, but a tower with a bright light on it that the humans have built on the cliffside, you realize and turn out your lights, causing your ship to seem to suddenly disappear to any humans who saw you. It might very well be a ghost ship, but the fact that it is so close to what would look like a floating light to the uninitiated makes me think this is just as likely. Number 2. Things moving on their own. Another common type of ghost is the alleged poltergeist. They are the type of spirit who enjoys their afterlife by messing around in your home with the intention of scaring you and causing as much property damage as possible. A common way these spirits apparently make their presence known is by moving objects and making them float through the air. Like when you hear a noise at night and go into the kitchen to investigate, only to find your mother's best china floating through the air before it suddenly drops to the floor, leaving you with one less token of remembrance to honor your loved ones with. But maybe this is not the work of a malevolent spirit, but simply a side effect of passing alien ships. When looking at various UFO sightings from across the world, some commonalities begin to emerge. The craft in question are often bright, shining lights against the dark night sky. They tend to appear and disappear just as quickly, and they often seem to be hovering or flying, seemingly on their own, with no visible means of propulsion. Or at least, none that we can see. Perhaps these alien craft are not flying with the use of rockets, but by manipulating gravity. If these ships are able to do this, they could use this to take away gravity under their ship, allowing it to hover or fly through the night. Something like this could affect the houses below it in a similar way that houses located near airports can have their contents rattled by passing planes. Perhaps when alien craft are negating gravity and flying overhead, they are unintentionally affecting gravity in the homes below them, causing things to float and move, not because of spirits, but because of gravity being manipulated. And once the ship has passed, the objects drop, making it seem like an evil spirit has destroyed these lighter objects out of spite for the homeowner. This would mean that people who are dealing with consistent ghost activity were actually just unlucky enough to be directly below an alien's commute. Number 1. Ghostly figures of the past. Everyone has heard some variation of a ghost story like this. You go into an old building that is hundreds of years old. At first, everything seems normal, when suddenly goosebumps break out across your flesh, as a chill runs up your spine. You turn and see something you don't expect. A figure from the distant past stands before you. Perhaps it is a soldier from the 1930s, and perhaps it is a small Victorian child in one of those weird little sailor outfits. You try to stammer out some words of greeting, but before you can, they have disappeared before your very eyes. Stories like this are very common in ghost sightings, and can take place anywhere from an old Victorian mansion, a field where an important battle was fought, or even in your own home. You may think that something like this would scream ghost and nothing else. But what if these haunting apparitions are just a side effect of extraterrestrial travel? When considering the possibility of alien visitors, we must ask the question of how they got to our planet in the first place. Even if their craft were capable of reaching light speed, they would take hundreds of years to reach our planet, which hardly seems worth it if assuming these beings have a comparable lifespan to humans. Perhaps they could cryogenically freeze themselves to make the journey more manageable, but that would still make getting to and from the planet a real hassle. Or perhaps these alien beings are capable of faster than light travel, which our concept of science says is impossible. Maybe the answer isn't that these aliens are moving fast. Maybe the answer is that they are bending space and time to reach their destination. If these beings were capable of traveling across the fourth dimension and bending space and time around, or folding it in on itself, then it is reasonable to hypothesize that there would be some unintended side effects. One theory of how time works is that all of it is happening at once. So, if a place, say a spooky mansion, were occupied by a small Victorian child in one point of time, and say Ryan Reynolds in another, maybe time folding in on itself to accommodate alien travel would cause us to be able to catch glimpses into the other points in time. So, this hypothetical Ryan Reynolds would see the child from the past and assume it was a ghost. And who knows, maybe the child would see Ryan and assume he is a handsome spirit from the future.
Coming in at number 5, the Corwin Witch House. The Jonathan Corwin House in Salem, or simply known better as the Witch House, was the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin, 1640 to 1718, a prominent figure in the horrors that happened there, and is actually the only structure you can visit in Salem today that has direct ties to the Salem witch trials of 1692. Well, that might not be the case, because we got a couple of those coming up. Trust me, this place is riddled with ties to those witches. Corwin bought the house in 1675 and lived there for more than 40 years. The Witch House is a 350-year-old thick building with black painted timber, 2.5 stories tall, built to last, massive, and looming. Located at 310 Essex Street in the historic district of Salem, the house stands in testimony to the witch trials, and it's believed that the Witch House was used by Jonathan Corwin and others to actually interrogate those accused of witchcraft. The Witch House remained with the Corwins, of course, until the mid-1800s, yet there wasn't many family around to liven it up. The Corwin curse seems like a weird one, since all the Corwin's kids, 5 children, all perished young from separate complications within the house. And this is where it gets really weird. Not only is the place haunted to hell and back with specters seen in the attic upstairs and loud voices, arguments heard in the empty house at night, 8 Corwin lives were lost to premature death in that house. All Corwins. Yeah, I'd say that makes for a pretty cursed home, alright? A family curse. Number 4, Proctor's Ledge. There are over 1,000 documents from Salem witch trials, yet none of the accounts actually specify where the hangings took place. For many years it was believed that the 19 people who were executed in Salem were hanged at the summit of Gallows Hill, on the edge of town to the west, where the town would meet for large gatherings. Seems like after some homework, the hill alone would be too hard to climb, not an ideal spot to hear or see the live trials, and was too thick and heavily wooded. Maps of 1700 Salem show Gallows Hill marked on the map, but no actual marker for the execution site. I feel like a detective all of a sudden. A team of researchers began to reconsider all of the evidence around 2010, eras of homework collected over the years, and eventually concluded that the real execution spot was Proctor's Ledge. Boom, baby! This was confirmed in 2016. Part of the evidence included 1692 eyewitnesses' accounts who wrote in journals that they were able to see the hangings from their homes to actually remains being dug up and found now. Now I know what you're thinking, it's named after John Proctor. No, it's not. However, odd timing, as he was one of the witches accused of witchcraft along with 3 of his other mistresses. Locals say that the lady in white visits Proctor's ledge. Some visitors claim to have caught the sight of her, though others catch only her disembodied voice. Are these the phantoms of the unsettled spirits tied to the grounds where they were hanged for eternity? Who knows? Number 3. Charter Street Burial Grounds. The Charter Street Burial Grounds started in 1637, also known as Old Burying Point or the Charter Street Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Salem. Many early and famous Salem residents are buried here, such as John Hawthorne, a judge in the Salem witch trials of 1692. Hawthorne, whose father had been a Salem magistrate, was born in 1641 and had 6 children. Hawthorne experienced several deaths in his family, including those of all his 3 brothers. Hawthorne died in 1717 at the age of 76, never apologizing for the role in the Salem witch trials. His headstone is surrounded by granite rectangles to help preserve what is left of the original stone. Being one of the oldest cemeteries and the sickening things that happen there, ghosts and spirits are often seen around the gravesite. There have been many strange occurrences here. Witch stuff aside, about 400 years of ghostly encounters have happened at the Old Burying Point Cemetery. Over the years, people have successfully captured EVP of voices from beyond the grave at the site. If you can hear me, say something. Stop yelling. Oh, sorry. Photographs of mysterious shadows, orbs, white mist, and even full apparitions are seen here. One of these apparitions is believed to be Mary Bright Corey, who died 1684. She was the second wife of Giles Corey, who later became an unfortunate victim of the witch trials himself. Another ghost seen is the powdered blue dress lady, whilst holding a picnic basket in one hand and sometimes accompanied by a young boy. Normally, once the cameras come out, the lady in white transitions into numerous bright orbs or vanishes altogether. Maybe the ghost woman is the same Mary Corey forever watching over Judge Hawthorne's grave. Number 2. Gallows Hill. Okay, so we were just talking about what happened to some of the accused during these hysterical trials and all the historical places that saw such violence. One of the most interesting witches tried of that was Giles Corey. Tried as a witch but never hanged. Actually, the old man known as Giles Corey was pressed to death with the judge's orders of him being a strong and stubborn old man and would not for the life of him indulge in the nonsense he was being accused for. He never admitted that he was a witch. Even throughout his torture, they laid him down and put a board on his back and proceeded to stone him to death, piling up stones on the board, resulting in crushing and eventually perishing underneath it. Only took about 4 days. Giles Corey apparently repeatedly yelled "more weight," further cementing his plea of not guilty to everyone watching at Gallows Hill. With his last breath, Giles apparently cursed the town of Salem, and this area is now an unearthly hotspot for paranormal activity. The Gallows Hill that most people are aware of is nothing but a baseball diamond, but underneath that baseball diamond, bone fragments and coffins have been found. Interesting, because no witches were ever buried in coffins. Maybe vampires? Giles died from his inflicted torture on September 19th, 1692, just after the 8th anniversary of his wife Mary's passing. Strange sounds emerge from the area at night, including loud knockings, thumpings that wake up neighbors from their bed, and, of course, the full-bodied apparitions said to walk the grounds yelling in the middle of the night. There have been full-bodied apparitions spotted within the woods, with disembodied voices shrieking in the middle of the night. The disturbingly loud voices yelled throughout the area have had some locals scratching their heads. Is this the ghost of Giles himself, speaking his curse upon the town for all to hear? Shh! Trying to sleep! And coming in at number 1, House of Seven Gables. Locals say the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, or also known as famously the House of Seven Gables, is the most haunted spot in Salem. How many haunted spots are there? Ghosts are just like really competitive. Now a prominent museum, protected in its original form, used for plays and reenactments by the locals, the original structure was simple in nature, with only 2.5 rooms and just under 3 stories tall. By the time of John Turner's death, the prominent merchant, sea captain, and owner of the house, he was one of the most wealthy men in the entirety of Massachusetts. Turner and Ingersoll's House of the Seven Gables is a ghostly reminder of the tormented souls both trying and being tried at the time of the hangings. But the Turner Ingersoll is a reminder for more than just lost shipping fortunes and curses, as it's also a homely reminder of Judge Hawthorne himself. and the guilt he inflicted on that town. As records show, Hawthorne may have feigned sympathy for the accused witches, but he never regretted his involvement in their trials or executions. And he certainly never expressed any remorse during the trials themselves for sending the accused to their death. Following the witch hysteria of the late 1600s, the Hawthorne family lost most of their wealth, no doubt influenced by the families of the accused witches who sought out justice for their dead loved ones. Acting now is only a museum of historic place. Each year, the museum hosts a series of theatrical plays, all of which surrounding the Salem witch trials. Such plays titled as Legacy of the Hanging, Judge Hawthorne, and Spirits of the Gables. But some of the actors aren't, well, very alive. As for the ghosts outside of the theatrical performances, well, everybody's got their own opinions on that, but tour guides and employees tend to avoid the attic, where some people have complained about being choked by ghostly figures. Local lore has many different stories to tell, and so do many of the visitors who enter Salem's most haunted house. Others report seeing a phantom boy who enjoys playing in the attic. Throughout the day, his giggles and laughs can be heard. Always giggling kids, eh? They're like the scariest ghosts. Well, that's about all the proof and lore I need to believe it. Imagine doing a show and a ghost just saying, "Line?"
Number 5. La Llorona. Have you ever heard the legend of La Llorona? If you're a top 5 scary fan, most likely, because I know for a fact I've mentioned it once or twice in a video before, it's a very commonly repeated old folktale, and it's shown up in countless movies and TV. It was just made into a movie that was connected to the Conjuring series. But if you missed out on all of that, the short version of the legend of La Llorona is a Spanish ghost who is said to have cast her own offspring into a river and drowned them in a manic fit. We've all had bad days. When she realized what she had done, she cast herself into the water as well, but was cursed to spend eternity searching for her young wherever a body of water is found, calling out into the night, known for a wail and a cry. It's why she's called La Llorona, the weeping woman. She appears all in white with long black hair and is recognized for her cry and appearance. Take a little sip. You entertain yourself back there for a minute. Now think about all of that while we watch this next clip, posted to Reddit titled, "My mom is in Mexico right now." And tell me if this doesn't make you think of La Llorona just a little bit, or like a lot bit. While walking late at night, a traveler comes across a strange white figure that seems clad in a long robe or a dress, moving in a way that makes them seem like they're not of this world. This white dress shining through the otherwise dark night. So what do you think, my faithful YouTube commenter audience? Is this proof of a ghost caught on camera, proof of an old legend walking among us, or is someone just putting the effort into a really complicated hoax? And if you're looking for more videos that might be hoaxes or might not be, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. We've got just about everything freaky you could possibly do a top 5 list on. Conspiracies, aliens, cryptids, true crime, fake crime, ghosts, another scary thing. We've got it. So hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit the bell, but please, would you kindly do that at the end of this video, because I got some more scary ghosts coming right up for you. Number 4, Oxford Castle. Stuart James is an amateur paranormal investigator and a spiritual enthusiast who's posted a few of his findings of strange happenings to the internet. Now, a lot of things he posted could find their way onto this list, but it was this video of him exploring Oxford Castle and prison that had my hands turning cold and clammy. More so than usual, I mean. Once standing as a medieval castle, the castle was mostly destroyed in the English Civil War. By the 18th century, was rebuilt to serve as Oxford's local prison. Now, a new prison was built on the site from 1785 and remained in operation all the way until 1996. With a few hundred years of visitors passing through its cold stone walls and spending their last days behind bars, is it much of a surprise that it's said to be haunted by the ghosts of some of the long-term residents who just can't seem to break free of prison life? As such, it's a popular spot for fledgling ghost hunters to go looking. The prison actually even offers ghost hunting packages and overnight adventures if you're looking for that sort of thing, but why don't you watch the clip first before you make any decisions? Did you see it? While looking through the glass window pane through a door, a face can be seen clear as day. James said as soon as he saw the face in the window, he and the rest of his team ran to the hills out of the prison, fearing what they had encountered and preferring to look the footage over later in the safety than spend another minute there. What do you think? Because I think I would do pretty much the exact same thing. I mean, I'm watching this video from the comfort of my office in a cozy little recording studio, and it was still enough to put my hair on end. I can't imagine that happening to you in front of your face and being able to keep a straight face, let alone dry jeans, and you're cool. I'd probably be on the first train out of Oxford and the rest of my days salt circling just in case. Number 3, the trampoline. Have you ever seen The Ring? Probably not, because if you saw the movie The Ring, you would have died roughly 7 days after that, and you wouldn't be able to watch all these lovely videos. I'm just kidding, of course. It's not haunted. Or is it? Now, the original Japanese Ring is one of my favorite horror movies, and I can't think of many things I've seen in my life half as truly creepy as Sadako stretching herself out of the TV into the real world. That scary long black hair covering her face, just the way she moves. Yeah, every time. Well, if I thought that was bad, this next thing might actually do me in and put me in the grave. Take a look at this next clip. At first, it seems like someone just filming some summer fun, until you get a better look at what appears to be a figure clad all in white crawling out from under the trampoline. Looking, honestly, a lot like Sadako crawling out of that TV. You see why I brought The Ring up? It definitely has me scratching my head watching over again. However, not everyone is as convinced as I am. I am pretty easily convinced. One commenter on the video attempted to debunk it as a fake, lending a bit of insight as a video editor. They said, I guess that the ghost figure is a clip of someone standing up, which has been motion tracked and composited in with blurring and opacity. If the shot was stabilized, like I'm guessing it was, this would be fairly straightforward and easy. The camera shake could be added in digitally after the motion tracking is done to really sell the shot. I noticed a blur on what looks like the ghost's back as it stands up, and the jumper leg passes over the figure. This blur is wiped away. This clip stops as the figure is moving above the black netting, which is being used to conceal any editing artifacts. Well, that's all well and reasonable, but it could also just be a ghost. That sounds like too much effort to me, personally. I mean, really, also, you gotta think of this. Who would go on the internet and just tell lies? What kind of person would go on the internet and then tell people that these supernatural things were happening if these things weren't really happening? What kind of person would do that just for clicks? Huh? Number 2, creepy puppet. I think we can all agree that, haunted or not, a puppet is terrifying. Nothing good has ever come from teaching a piece of wood to flap its lips. Just look at Jeff Dunham. Whether it's the uncanny valley that makes them so disturbing or simply a reasonable disdain for ventriloquism, puppets are scary. Think of that little freak from Saw, the Goosebumps dummy, or Annabelle. Well, the truth is always scarier than fiction, I find. And in this next clip, we've got ourselves a true haunted puppet. Take a look at this footage that has people's jaws hanging open. Watch the clip. Did you see it? It was kind of hard to miss. Looks like this dummy is keen to give a performance without any help from anybody and has learned to move its mouth on its own. Is something possessing it? Now, knowing its history actually makes things a little bit more interesting, because it seems like it could be likely. The doll is nicknamed Mr. Fritz, and it was recovered from a World War II prison camp where it is said to have been made by a prisoner. It eventually made its way into the hands of a private collector in the United Kingdom. This new owner, one Michael Diamond, claims that several times he noticed the glass display case on Mr. Fritz would open on itself during the night. Now, the reasonable thing to do would be to, burn his house down and make sure the doll burns up and release that evil away and, move countries. He instead set up a camera and filmed it for a few nights and caught this horrifying footage of the seemingly possessed dummy talking. His solution was to wrap it in chains and keep a blanket over it. I would send it to space or cast it into the ocean, but you do you. He's actually not too worried about it at all. Mr. Diamond says, "My wife and daughter both hate it, and I understand why, but I'm not intimidated by it. A braver man than me." Now, this could be faked, I'm sure, but I'm inclined to believe this is real. Haunted or not, I just do not trust this puppet even a little bit, Number 1, grandparents' ghost. That sounds sad. I like to save the best for last, and I think after you watch this clip, you might agree with me, as this is one of the weirder things on a list of all weird things. This was posted to the Ghost subreddit earlier in the month and was making the rounds on the paranormal and scarier sides of the internet, as even the biggest skeptics were wondering just what it was they were looking at. This redditor and their family had taken a day for a family vacation at a nearby water park, and when they had returned, there were several calls from the security company telling them that an alarm inside their grandparents' home had been tripped. When they returned home to watch the footage, they were stunned at what they had seen, and I invite you now to watch it too. As you could probably see, there's clearly something going on in that house that's a little more powerful than just the wind or a trick of the light. And hey, don't start telling me this is just an orb of dust floating by the camera lens, okay? There is something seriously wrong going on in here, and I think they need to dial an exorcist. The doors of the living room mysteriously shut by themselves at the same time that the lamp on the table is flickering out like crazy. You keep watching the video, you also see a bowl moving by itself and a chair being dragged across the floor. All things that are like a checklist if you're going through to check if your house is being haunted. That's typical poltergeist behavior. Now, some people were a bit skeptical, suggesting this could very likely have been doctored or faked just to get some attention, but he did post a follow-up afterwards to provide just a little bit more context. He said that he did some digging into the history surrounding his house and the neighborhood. Found out that he lived in the town Napoleon grew up in. That's pretty cool. But more interestingly, he found that the house that his grandparents lived in used to be two houses that were converted into one. And in the other one, there was a story of a man taking his life. So could this be a sign of his spirit passing through something walking through the worlds? Or is this all just a complicated scheme for some upvotes and clicks? Number 5, Brazil. Coming up first on our list of ghost footage that's been freaking out the pros and spooking the amateurs alike is this bizarre clip captured and uploaded to the internet by one Mr. Miracle BR. Thank you, Mr. Miracle. Mr. Miracle shared this, and we're glad they did, even if it does have us questioning the nature of our reality ever so slightly. The footage appears to be a body camera footage of a police raid in Brazil, where a group of plainclothed officers are ready to kick down doors to deal with whatever's hiding inside. Of course, they might just be the wrong emergency department to call, as it seems like the Ghostbusters might have been a lot more appropriate. Take a look now. When they kick in that door, either they used a little bit too much force, or there's something in there they're not going to be able to put handcuffs on. The door keeps banging, swinging rapidly and violently back and forth in place. Whatever's going on with this one door seems to be present on all the doors in this warehouse, as every door they pass through starts swinging violently as if it's got a mind of their own, leading to the men getting understandably jumpy. You know, the academy doesn't teach you how to deal with ghosts. They start looking over their shoulders over and over, and the video cuts pretty short when the men start to dart down the hall, running away in a flurry. Running away from what, I wonder. Now, this clip alone is already pretty unsettling. Imagine, even with you and your squad, well trained, heavily armed, I still think seeing something you can't explain would have me on edge in a building that already looks pretty creepy. The creepiest part, though, is apparently this happens to cops more than we know. When the clip was posted, someone on Reddit responded with their own experience in the service, and they wrote, "I've cleared some creepy buildings as a cop. The most unrealistic thing about this video is that they kept going. I remember clearing this abandoned plantation house that still had an alarm hooked up with my partner. As we cleared each room, we left the doors open so we knew we were cleared. Turned around after the last door and all the doors were shut. Noped on out of there." Makes a lot of sense. I would probably do the same. And if you're looking for way more videos about ghosts, goblins, ghouls, and basically everything freaky above the sun and below it, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. Hit that subscribe button, please tickle that little bell if you wouldn't mind, but do that after this video, because we got way more ghost sightings coming up for you right now.
Coming in at number 4, back in the late 1930s, on an especially dark evening, a nun was driving a school bus filled with children home after a field trip. They were heading down Shane Road, but when approaching the railroad crossing, the bus abruptly stalled out on the tracks. Most of the students were sleeping, so the nun was quietly attempting to start the engine back up, when a train emerged, seemingly out of nowhere, as its headlamp was burned out. Something that hopefully won't happen anymore. It was too late to evacuate the children, as the train was moving way too fast. The nun, desperately and frantically, turned the key, making one last attempt to restart the bus, just as the train smashed through the bus, cutting it in half. The nun was thrown through the windshield, but miraculously survived. The rest of the folks on the bus weren't as fortunate and passed from the event. A few weeks later, the nun, guilt-ridden and heartbroken, returned to the site of the accident, filled with guilt and wanted to end her life. She parked her car on the tracks and sat there, waiting for the next train to come along. Later, when a train came into sight, speeding down towards her, in the same way as that tragic night, the nun began to hear some familiar voices. Then, her car began to move forward, as if it was being pushed from behind, rolling to safety just as the train passed by. In disbelief, the nun got out of her car and began looking around, expecting to find some sort of good Samaritan, but didn't see a single person. She looked back at her car and noticed child-sized handprints on the back of her trunk, and realized that the ghosts of her students had saved her life. The nun was then blessed with a new purpose in life, and she opened a school for orphans, teaching there for the rest of her days. It is said that to this day, if anyone parks their car on or near the railroad tracks at Shane Road, ghostly children will push the vehicle to safety, as they are determined to make sure that no one meets the same gruesome fate that they suffered. Many locals have made claims that say that you can hear the rumbling sounds of a train nearing, the steam whistle howling, and the screeching of wheels as if the train is grinding to a halt, but nothing is there at all, except for the haunting chill of the night. One of the children from this accident is more, shall I say, social than the others, and sometimes tries to find her way home. Not long after these initial incidents, a woman was driving down Shane Road late one night, and as she approached the railroad crossing, she saw a little girl standing all alone on the side of the road, holding a teddy bear. Now this woman immediately stopped, pulled over, and offered the girl a ride home. Once they arrived at the girl's house, the child was hesitant to leave the vehicle and to head inside. The woman assumed that the girl must have run away from home after a fight with her parents and offered to head to the house first to reassure the family. When the woman got out of the car, she looked back to give the child a reassuring smile, but the girl had completely vanished. She quickly reopened her car door, but no one was there. However, the seatbelt was still fastened. The photo evidence we have from this tale shows the little girl waiting by the tracks, just wanting to get home.
Our next weird clip for you is going to be this footage that was uploaded to the Ghosts subreddit. It's got investigators talking and viewers pausing to try and understand just what's going on. And a shout out to the Ghosts subreddit. Thanks for doing most of the heavy lifting on my job. Now you might think that ghosts and spirits only come out to play at night, but when the weather's nice, even the ghosts and ghouls and all things malevolent come out to soak up some rays. Let's give that clip a quick watch. Did you see it? Kinda hard not to. The white specter rushing by the side of the house. The user posted this with the caption, "Coworker caught this outside of his house and we're speechless," and it's easy to see why. What is it that's been caught on camera sprinting by that house? Now there's definitely something mysterious here. I get the same vibe off this mysterious entity that I do like the Fresno night crawlers, to shout out one of my favorite cryptids and unknown paranormal mysteries. I can't explain what's happening, and I know there's probably a reasonable scientific explanation, but I'm not finding it right now. Now, not everyone is as convinced as me. I'm very easily swayed. Some commenters had suggested that perhaps this could be a small animal like a monkey running by really fast, or a parrot flying by really, really fast. You'll have to let us know down below in the comments whether or not you think this was proof of a spectral entity caught on security, or if this is just a funny little creature monkeying around. For what it's worth, and I think we should take this seriously, I think a monkey could be a ghost. As far as I know, monkeys can become ghosts. I've never seen someone disprove this. I've never seen someone prove this either, but this might be that proof we need.
In second place, we have Johnny Johnson. While Toys R Us may no longer exist as a physical store in the United States, I'd like to travel back to the 70s when it did. Located in Sunnyvale, California. No, not Sunnydale. No Hellmouth here, I don't think. Toys R Us decided to build a store over the property of a former ranch. Honestly, pretty normal sounding so far, right? Staff and customers alike began to report multiple incidents of what they believed to be a haunting, ranging from hearing their names whispered to them, or feeling cold breezes, and seeing objects moving around on their own. The woman's bathroom, in particular, seemed especially spooky because the sink's faucet taps would turn on by themselves. Oh, and some female employees said they experienced what felt like some invisible being playing with their hair, which... In 1978, psychic Sylvia Brown held a seance there for the first time, determined to identify the entity. The ghost haunting the store allegedly revealed himself as Johnson. Johnson's ghost told Brown that he was a preacher and a ranch hand in the 1880s on what was then the Murphy family farm. He spoke with a mild Swedish accent, and his first name was either John, Jan, or Johan. 10 out of the 16 people assembled there for the seance said they heard a high buzzing noise when Sylvia was supposedly listening to the ghost. The ghost told her that he had been in love with Murphy's daughter Elizabeth, who ran off with an East Coast lawyer. Old news clippings say that Johnson accidentally hacked his leg with an axe while carelessly chopping down trees and met his end from the injuries. Sylvia repeatedly went back to the Toys R Us to communicate with Johnny, who she called the most stubborn, ornery, argumentative ghost she'd ever met in her book, stating that she had tried many times to explain to him that his lifetime as Johnny Johnson had ended. Apparently, Johnny got so frustrated about being told that he had passed that he gave her the ultimatum that if she ever brought it up again, he would go silent. Sylvia let the matter drop since she and the ghost supposedly had a quasi-friendship where they would chat about the annoying and noisy kids who frequented the store. A 2007 piece on Snopes, which if you're unaware of, is a pretty legitimate fact-checking site, featured a woman named O'Brien who had worked at the store for over 18 years stocking shelves, claiming that she didn't believe in ghosts, but when you feel a breeze behind behind you or someone calls your name and there's nobody there. Funny things happen that she just couldn't rationally explain. The report talked about dolls and toy trucks leaping off the shelves, balls bouncing down the aisles, and children's books falling off the racks. Baby swings would move on their own. The folks at Toys R Us say they've tried to explain it logically, but they've got nothing. Johnny was captured on camera in 1978, casually leaning against the shelves while the group that was there for the seance is shown sitting. Now that the store is no longer a Toys R Us, it has housed a Spirit Halloween, which feels fitting for some weird reason.
Number 1, the Arizona truck ghost. You ask any man of the road, ask them if they've ever seen anything strange up there, and they'll tell you everything. And this next clip is just more fuel for that fire. William Church is a truck driver who was driving down Arizona State Route 87 on March 11th, and he saw something he couldn't explain. And this time, it wasn't just the heebie-jeebies from one too many coffees and a Slim Jim for breakfast. He spotted something spectral on the road that was recorded by his dash cam, and he thinks this translucent figure was something not of this world. You can see the lines through the legs making a figure, Church told Fox News. Now, there are some locals who believe that the highway itself is haunted. It was first built in 1927, and stretching across approximately 273 miles, there's a good bit of tragic history on Route 87. It's been described as one of Arizona's most treacherous roads, and as such, countless fatal car accidents have occurred on this particular stretch of land. Could it be that because of this, there's spirits still trapped on the long, lonely road, wandering around looking for a home they'll never be able to return to? After Church's video was uploaded and went a bit viral, viewers reported that they'd seen a lot of supernatural activity around Arizona's highways. If I'm ever traveling through Arizona, I think I will take a boat. Perhaps. One of Arizona's many plentiful boats for its vast and teeming rivers and lakes. That's what everybody knows about Arizona. It's a really wet state, right? Really wet state. Number 5, James May Pompey. James May Pompey. James May Pompey. I'm going to be saying that for the rest of the day. James May is a renowned British television host, notable for decades of service to the BBC, zipping cars around exotic places. After Top Gear quietly came to a mutual end that all parties agreed on in 2015, May continued globe-trotting, with less companions and less motoring, in a new show called James May, Our Man In. Well, when our man went to Rome to see Pompeii, it seems he accidentally caught a specter on tape in the old city of Pompeii. You watch this clip and tell me what you think, because I think this one is all kinds of freaky and might be one of the better ghost clips I've seen in a minute. That's why we're starting with it. As May is talking, a lone figure can be seen crossing the otherwise empty street before seemingly evaporating before your very own eyes. It's eerie, I ain't gonna lie. An unsettling coincidence is that the ghost seemingly appears as May is talking to the audience, reminding us that even though Pompeii has found life as a tourist destination, it's still one of history's biggest mass graves. Now, I like to play skeptic a little bit, like, you know, I'm more Scully than I am Mulder. This ghost footage is pretty striking, but we can't cross out the possibility that this could just be something as boring as a camera glitching out or someone trying to scrub out a pedestrian in the background of an otherwise clean shot. Although if that's the case, why so much of the figure left behind? Could this be a former citizen of Pompeii, still trapped through the daily loop of her everyday life after the volcano claimed it and changed their lives forever? Or could this ghost be the ghost of Jeremy Clarkson's career hanging around James May? That one's too mean. Too far. Anyway, we may never know. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this one. And if you're looking for way more ghost videos, you already know I'm about to tell you top 5 scary is where to be. And if ghosts aren't your jam, we have got just about everything freaky under the sun and above the sun you could possibly imagine. Cryptids, conspiracies, aliens, true crime, fake crime, baby, we got it. If it's spooky, we've done a video or 3 on it. So hit subscribe, hit the bell, and don't miss a single second. But do it after the end of this video, okay? We got way more ghosts coming up for you. Number 4, the insane asylum ghost. This next clip is one that is going to have the hairs on the back of your neck standing on end. This was originally posted to the Ghosts subreddit. A user by the lovely name of Random Doge 47 posted that she'd recently visited the Heartwood Insane Asylum, just as a visitor. Don't want to make that clear, not a patient. It's an abandoned mental facility in the UK that's long been thought to be the home of malicious spirits and poltergeists of former patients who never managed to find peace and drift off towards the afterlife. Definitely given bad vibes looking at pictures of this. Pictures of abandoned hospitals give me the creeps. Something bad. You can just tell nothing good has ever happened here, and nothing good will continue to happen here. Take a look at this footage. In the clip, we see someone or something in the top window seemingly noticing that they're being recorded and then hurriedly shutting the window to sneak off into the night. Now that's pretty darn creepy. But you could be thinking, wow, what if it's just the Redditor's friend or something and they schemed this hoax by preparing somebody. They had somebody climb up in there. Well, the place is locked up and the interiors are dilapidated in a state of serious disarray, and it's all collapsed in on itself and couldn't really support anyone up on the top floors. The windows are locked and the Redditor said there was no easy way for someone to get in. So what is happening here? Is this the ghost of a former patient? Someone who managed to sneak inside and is squatting inside an abandoned insane asylum? 3 raccoons in a trench coat pretending to be human and hiding out in an abandoned asylum where they live and go on little adventures? It could be, and that's what scares me. But you let me know what you think this could be, okay? Number 3, security footage. Now we got ourselves another clip from the ghost subreddit. What can I say? If you want to look at ghosts, it's a pretty good place to go. They're all right there. This one was posted to us from user Ryman8 with the caption, "Something set off the security footage on one of our properties. Nothing was stolen. This is the footage." Now you take a look for yourself at the spine-tingling footage. This is one of those ones I had to watch twice, so don't feel bad if you gotta scoot back 30 seconds to watch it again. Let's roll it. At first, it might just seem like a frame at a skinamarink. I had to really press my nose up to the monitor to see what was going on here. But you can see the faintest silhouette of a figure creeping through in the background, seemingly walking through thin air, barely able to make it out. And then when you see it, you're probably never gonna sleep again as you see that ethereal little shape moving through the room. Now, the poster claims that the front door to the property was open, and that is what triggered the alarm and triggered the security footage. Who could have done that if not for this malevolent spirit? One commenter suggested that it was possible that the energy dispelled by the ghost could have been what set off the alarm and opened the door, and that's why it looks so spectral and ethereal on the footage. What do you all think out there, my internet comment hive mind? Is this some real proof of something from another world walking into ours? Or is this just some dust and light hitting the camera at just the right angle and our eyes filling in the details we wish we were seeing? Please do let us know down below. Doing some digging on this one, the Redditor returned to the same thread a year later and reported that nothing else like this had ever happened, and that he'd researched evidence of any spirits in the local area or on this property and couldn't find anything. So this could just be a one-off incident, or it could be something much more sinister. It could be. I can say whatever I want when I'm talking into a camera. I could say that all of these are aliens if I wanted to. I'm in control here. Number 2, the ghost palette. Coming up next on this list, we have got some more weird security footage to tickle your viewing pleasure. There's no ethereal figures walking around in this one, but it is pretty spooky nonetheless. This footage was posted by someone who used to work in a meat packing plant, but presumably left when they saw this security camera footage and found out the joint was haunted. In the video, we can see a pallet jack on the CCTV freaking out, seemingly being pulled or moving itself around the warehouse. I've got to say, haunting aside, the atmosphere of this particular meatpacking plant already seems scary. You know, it's flickering lights, cold looking floors. I'm pretty sure this is the meat plant where Jigsaw was playing his funny little games. Back to the topic at hand. What is going on with that pallet jack? There's no reason for it to be moving. There's no wind or anything to push it, and it looks like someone is manually moving it around, if not a little awkwardly. Could it be a ghost who got itself hired? Or is it the ghost of an employee of the meat plant who's still stuck working here? I gotta wonder if ghosts have rights or like a ghostly union, because it does seem like the ghost is the only one on shift right now, and that can't be safe. Where's his ghostly supervisor? Is he making sure he's taking his 30? Now, some commenters with more experience in warehouse settings have suggested that the pallet jack malfunctioning like that could be faulty wiring, a loose axle, or something that could be causing it. There could be all manner of reasonable explanations, or it could be something supernatural sneaking into our world. So what do you think, my comment gang? Is this just a pallet jack on the fritz, or is this a ghost caught on camera? And finally, number 1, mystery orbs. Our last clip today comes to us from the subreddit High Strangeness, which I cannot recommend enough if you like paranormal and bizarre, inexplicable content on the internet, and I kind of suspect you do because you're watching this video, aren't you? But don't spend too much time there. Remember to come on back to Top 5 Scary. Posted to us by user Swingset Superman, this ring light footage has been puzzling viewers as they try to figure out what's going on and what was caught on camera. You take a look for yourself and you see if you got any luck putting this together. There appears to be a series of super bright lights floating outside around the front door. Now that might not be that odd, but it's the way they move I can't stop focusing on. They just don't seem like they're from this world, you know? They float around as if all the dots are connected in some way, moving in coordination. At first I thought they might might be bugs, fireflies or something, but I ain't never seen no bug move together like that. If anything, I think we can qualify these strange dots as a UAP, an unidentified aerial presence. That's what I see at first. It seems like a fleet of little minuscule UFOs, although maybe I have just made one too many UFO videos recently, and I think anything strange in the sky, regardless of height, are UFOs. Now, one commenter suggested these could be fairies or pixies of some sort, which would be interesting. I don't think we really talk much about fairies or sprites on the channel much at all. We always talk about scary supernatural things. Makes sense, we're top 5 scary, but I would love to talk about a fairy sometime. So I send it off to you, internet commenters. Take a look at the clip, look up the original source if you'd like, and you let me know what you think was captured by the camera that day. Maybe it was just a ghost dropping off a ghostly Uber Eats order. Number 5. Walking Dead. My first true tale of phantasmic terror comes to us from Reddit user Jalcott. Answering a question posed in the thread, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's the weirdest and most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Hospitals already seem pretty haunted as is, so it's no surprise that there was so many good answers. But Jalcott stood out. Take a listen. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early on in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't talk, but there was no medical reasoning as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the army when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing, and later officially declared dead. However, 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a Virginia hospital ER in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Deschênes, and I've been dead for 10 years. And according to the Redditor, those were the last words he ever spoke to anyone. He had shown up to the hospital covered in dust and wearing an old uniform that he'd been wearing the night he vanished. His social security had not been used at all, and he had no ID on him whatsoever. However, via fingerprints, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever was claiming to be him simply wasn't, and asked to never be contacted again." The nurse went on to add that Marion would pace all day, every day, moving his mouth in a way that looked like he was muttering to himself, but nothing came out when he moved his lips. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he was laughing hysterically, but not so much as a breath could ever be heard. The nurse said she tried talking to him almost daily, and he would appear to listen, but only react by periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications and treatment plans were pursued, but nothing ever affected him. Therapy was tried as well, but all that would happen was Marion would just grin and start pacing again. She goes on to say that on her last day, she saw Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing back his head to laugh. She closes by saying all those years she'd wondered, was he a ghost? And all those years later, she still doesn't know. Click through and listen to as many top 5 scary videos as your ears can handle. Moving on. Number 4, things that go bunk in the night. Now you would never ever believe this, but our next story comes from Reddit as well. A similar thread, a similar question. What's the most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Lots of good ones to pick from, but this one from Mad Rampager really stood out for me. I used to be in the military. The training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we'd zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? Weird things happen, and I mean human error and all that. Well, then came the instance that freaked everybody out. It was night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us had been drifting off to sleep, and we were lying on our beds when suddenly my friend heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and tried to get to sleep. What happened next still chills me to the bone to this day. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other end of the bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I could have dismissed this as a figment of his imagination, except me and 5 other people around him heard it. Creepier still, there was no one there. And weirdly, it sounded like the voice of a young girl that had said it. For reference, our camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin building. The island had been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone any children. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and underneath his pillow was a note. Remember me? Now, as I said, we're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits whatsoever on the island. Our bunks were locked for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea what had happened. We never spoke about it again after that night, and it still chills me every time I think about it. Number 3, old friends. Our next story is from a Reddit thread asking, what's your ghost story? And I gotta point this one out just because it was too funny, but the original poster included the title in brackets, serious, to deter any would-be paranormal pranksters. Just serious ghost stories, please. Luckily, Redditors obliged. User Barbed Cats shared this terrifying tale. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone else stranded, and it would turn out that the guy standing there was somebody I'd actually been to school with, my old friend Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe just a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the reunion with me and have a drink. He says no, just take me back home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that really was just the outskirts, up by the fairground and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that must be where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, just drop me off here. It was nice to see you again, and he walked off into the night. So I went to the high school reunion, met up with some old classmates, and we start to talk. Now please understand me here. I am stone cold sober, nor do I ever take anything harder than soda. Tired after a 13-hour flight, but I was completely sober. As we were talking about who was showing up and who wasn't, I mentioned to my old classmate that I just picked Jim up a few miles off east of town and had dropped him up by the fairgrounds. Now for some reason everyone got really quiet. Even the guy belting out karaoke stopped, and my cousin went white as a shirt. Barb. Jim died 8 years ago. Rolled his car. I start to feel really dizzy, and I go out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I'm going crazy. And there on the seat was a newspaper printed 8 years ago containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and again, I take it out to stare at it, and I still wonder just what the hell happened that night. Number 2, Ghost on the Line. The next story comes to us from a thread asking law enforcement officers of Reddit, what is the creepiest call that you've ever been on? We got a very creepy answer from user Smokey Bonaparte sharing this creepy little tale. The Redditor writes, 911 dispatcher calling in. We received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her before and her husband in the past, so I recognized the voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulances advised that they had a 15-minute ETA as she was in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her just about her husband and how she was doing, and just making pretty standard small talk with her. The ambulance arrives and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to her door to go answer the door, and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Oh, that's pretty normal, right? Well, here's where it gets very weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute after, and they say that no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address, and he's breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios to ask me who called. I tell them it was the elderly woman who lived on residence. He tells me he's going to call this in and he needs to speak with my shift supervisor. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the same information I relayed, that it was all correct, and asks what's going on. Apparently the old woman had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back for them and confirmed it was the old woman who called. The ambulance transferred the hospital and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. But I took a call from a ghost that day. Number 1, uninvited guest. Closing off our list is this story which chilled my spine like Sub-Zero. Coming to us from user Parole Model, which hey, by the way, love the pun. It was from an Ask Reddit thread asking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Lots and lots and lots of good ones, but this one took the cake. So lend an ear. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room and on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room that were fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it might just be something off the TV screen, and then one evening I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, and I looked in the mirror and saw a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. I turned to look at the mirror again and he was gone. I felt more than a little spooked. Another time we were just sitting in the living room and we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running across upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work leaving us all alone. Around that time I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 posters slowly get peeled off the wall. No, it wasn't just them falling and dragging each other down. It looked as if someone was carefully unsticking the tape and removing them. The next morning my friend put them back up saying, "Well, I need to get some better tape." She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to keep living there anymore. We'd never really talked about anything that had happened in that house, as if talking about it might actually make it worse. But after she moved, I finally confronted her and said it. I said, "Dude, your house was haunted. I hope you knew that." She replied, "Yeah, we knew it was. Some guy and his granddaughter used to live there, but he took her life and then took his own. So it was probably them or something. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you." Later, she would dig out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the crime. The picture that went with the article was the exact man I saw all those years ago. Okay.
Number 5 on this list is St. Mary's Catholic Church. This is a Catholic church in Nashville, Tennessee that is apparently deeply haunted. World on Fire says there are 3 ghosts rumored to haunt this church and its grounds. One story holds that a priest died during construction of the church. Another story claims that during the Civil War, a Catholic priest serving as a chaplain for the Confederate Army was shot and killed in the church. There's another rumor that the ghost is the spirit of Bishop Richard Pius Miles, the first bishop of Diocese of Nashville, who died in 1860. He was buried in the church basement and supposedly still haunts his old stomping grounds. According to one story from 1937, a pounding at his bedroom door woke up a priest in the rectory, but he could find no one there. After he fell asleep, he was woken up again, this time by a pounding on the headboard of his bed. There was no one in his room, so the awakening was attributed to supernatural causes by superstitious locals. I can't say that I personally would substitute a ghost pounding on my headboard's wake-up call for a regular alarm clock, but hey, whatever gets you out of bed in the morning, right? Nowadays, the 3 ghosts that wander around here are sort of just part of the church and accepted among those who pray and worship here. Apparently these ghosts are relatively calm and won't cause too much trouble other than the occasional midnight stomping, that is. There was, however, one story where the chaplain for the Confederate Army ghost attacked someone. It happened over 50 years ago now, but apparently a woman and her young son were walking past the church and got bombarded by this ghost. They both managed to get out okay, but they were obviously really shaken up. Now, nobody knows why this ghost did this or what the story was, but we think that this woman and her son were descendants of someone who had dealings with him in real life. Potentially their grandfather killed this man or something along those lines. It's all a bit hazy, but the good thing is that's the only group of people his ghost has ever chosen to attack before. Other than that, these ghosts are just relatively annoying, but they shouldn't cause you too much problems if you go here. Number 4 on this list is the widow. There was a widow who lived in the 20th century who was a very devout Catholic. For some reason, this woman, who we're gonna call Ruth, had a very strong connection to the spirits that were in purgatory. Her story goes like this. The first soul Ruth encountered was her departed husband. He had often been impatient during his bout with cancer and had reproached God. One evening, Ruth heard a voice. That happened almost every evening over a long time when she came in from the stable. Then she suddenly recognizes the voice of her husband, but she isn't quite sure yet. Then she kneels down and just prays the rosary. She recommends her husband in particular. Yes, she thinks. He was often rather impatient. Is that perhaps the reason he must still do penance? A few evenings later, she sees a nebulous apparition right in the middle of the room. She takes holy water and prays, "O Lord, give him eternal rest." It makes her very upset, and then she sees her husband. He speaks quietly. "Don't be afraid, Ruth, it's me. I may come here to ask your help. Pray 3 chaplets each day." And then he was gone. So every day she prays 3 chaplets. Each time she adds, "Good God, forgive my husband his impatience when he suffered." After some weeks, her husband stands again in the middle of the room. He looks well. He's friendly and beautiful. She recalls how he was a young man. He says nothing. He only looks at her so grateful and full of love. Then she asks him, "How are you, Jacob?" He answers clearly and quietly, "I'm fine. I may come soon. I thank you, Ruth. I thank you so much." And after this, he never appeared again. So that's a pretty famous story, and Ruth went on to interact with many ghosts like this in purgatory through her life. In fact, some people started to speculate that she may even be a ghost herself as well. Number 3 on this list is the Most Holy Trinity Church. Here we have another Catholic church that's meant for worship, but has been riddled by a haunting. World on Fire says there are a few possible origins of the hauntings that supposedly plague this old parish. One claims that the current church building, built from 1882 to 1885, stands over an old cemetery where some bodies are still buried. Supposedly the ghosts of the folk under the church haunt the building and mysteriously turn lights on and off, open and close doors, and walk back and forth. Or it could just be living people doing those things, since those activities, believe it or not, are not limited to ghosts. The living can also open doors and turn on lights. At least they could last time I checked. Or maybe I'm a ghost and I don't even know it. Anyways, another source of the ghost legend is that one of the first pastors of the church, Monsignor Michael May, passed away in his bedroom and continues to haunt the church grounds. Apparently, visitors hear mysterious steps at all hours of the night, and dogs have been known to stare as if in a trance at the stairs and dining room of the rectory. In all honesty, dogs staring at things, definitely not indisputable ghostly evidence. I mean, I've seen dogs do some weird stuff before, so I don't think that we can prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt based on their activities. However, it is very important to note nonetheless, whenever a big storm is coming, watch what your animals do. I bet that they'll go and hide or act differently right before a massive thunderstorm or a tornado or something. Us humans, we don't even notice it, we don't sense it at all, but they definitely will. This sort of weird sense, it also translates to ghosts as well, so maybe the dog really is seeing something from the afterlife at this church. Number 2 on this list is Annalise Michel. This is a very sad story where there may not ever have been any ghosts involved, but they sure thought that there was. Wikipedia says, when Michelle was 16, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. Her condition worsened despite medication, and she became suicidal, also displaying other symptoms for which she took medication as well. After the taking of psychiatric medications for 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Michelle and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. While rejected at first, true priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. The priests began conducting exorcism sessions, and the parents stopped consulting doctors. Annalise Michel stopped eating food and died of malnourishment and dehydration after 67 exorcism sessions. Michelle's parents and the 2 Roman Catholic priests were found guilty of negligent homicide and were sentenced to 6 months in jail as well as a fine. This might not be the most terrifying of all of the ghost stories on here, considering the only real ghost involved was the fear that everybody had to begin with. Poor Annalise would have went through absolute agony in her final days when there probably wasn't any paranormal activity to even begin with. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Rita's Church. Several decades ago, there was one heck of a ghostly interaction that went down at this church. World on Fire says, on All Souls Day in the early 1960s, St. Rita's Parish had a ghostly visitation. More than a dozen parishioners had gathered there to pray when sometime in the early evening the organ began to play by itself. Suddenly, 6 robed monks appeared, 3 wearing black and 3 wearing white. The parishioners attempted to flee, but they found the doors of the church were locked. The phantom monks moved towards the parishioners while the organ continued its dirge. Finally, the vision faded as a disembodied voice whispered, "Pray for us." So next time you see a ghost, it probably just wants to ask you a favor and hopefully not kill you. All they were asking for was a little prayer, which I think everyone would have been more than happy to indulge with at that time. Of course, having a bunch of ghost monks show up out of nowhere, lock all of the doors, and keep you in there, that's pretty terrifying. Everyone is still very wary around St. Rita's Church in case these monks ever do come back.
Number 5, the South Shields Poltergeist. Coming up first on this list is going to be the story of the South Shields Poltergeist, a recent case of spiritual harassment. I love a contemporary ghost. We got too many ghosts from the Victorian era or like the 1800s. We don't get nearly enough modern 2000s hauntings. Anyway, in 2005, an anonymous couple living in England had begun reporting seeing strange things happening around the house. Their furniture would be dragged along the ground, which is odd, but stranger things have happened. Doors left open, again, bizarre. But it was when they'd come home and found the chairs stacked on top of each other, they began to suspect that something odd was happening. One evening, the couple was asleep, and the wife had been struck in the back of the head with a doll, one of her son's toys. When she sat upright, she found herself being pelted by an onslaught of toys thrown across the room, as if G.I. Joe himself was leading the offensive. Dolls and blocks thrown at them from the hallway. They tried to cover themselves up with the comforter, but found that whatever entity that had taken up residence in their home had other ideas, and they found themselves pulling back at this invisible force. This horrifying encounter would culminate in the husband waking up and discovering 13 clean red cuts all over his skin, and a burning, searing pain on his back. That same morning, the couple discovered a rocking horse that had been hung from the ceiling, a stuffed rabbit toy sitting at the top of the stairs with a box cutter left between its hands, unsettling things written on the walls. You know, stuff like "Go die" or "You're dead." Very clear cut. I gotta say, this poltergeist really has a flair for the dramatic, setting the scene like this. That's good environmental storytelling with that set dressing. Anyway, enough was enough, and after having lived through enough activity to fill the brunt of one of the bad Conjuring sequels, they contacted a paranormal investigator. These investigators claimed that they made contact with an evil entity that looked like a pure black void that radiated pure evil. Shortly after the investigation crew showed up, however, the haunting seemed to stop. Guess the ghosts got scared when somebody stepped to them. The couple has now gone on to live a normal, happy life, although they claim they have been traumatized by the events. I know I would probably never look at that stuffed rabbit the same way again. And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for more good content from us, well, hey, we've got loads and loads of that. We got ghosts, ghouls, aliens, government cover-ups, SCPs, and just about everything freaky under the sun. Let's keep going. Number 4, Kate Morgan. Our next entry is about the mystery of Kate Morgan, whose death has been a long unsolved mystery in American history. In 1888, the Hotel del Coronado opened in Coronado, California, just across from San Diego. It was as classy as a joint in the late 1880s could be, and upon its completion, it was the largest resort hotel in the world. Our story, though, doesn't start until 1892, when a young woman named Kate Morgan checked into the hotel, room 304. She had told the desk she was there to meet with her brother, who was a doctor who was treating her for stomach cancer. However, tragically, 5 days after first checking in, Miss Morgan was found dead on the steps of the hotel of what looked to be a self-inflicted gunshot. Now, it would later come out after her death that for whatever reason, the story she had told the staff was all untrue, with an investigation suggesting maybe Morgan had been a con artist. What we did know about her is that she'd been married to a postal worker from Nebraska named Tom Morgan, and that Kate was believed to be visiting San Diego to visit her brother, who was a gambler, not a doctor. But, you know, they probably pulled in similar amounts of money. Doctors didn't even think that Morgan's gunshot wound was self-inflicted, as the bullet retrieved from the autopsy hadn't come from a gun Kate had owned. However, the case was never opened. It was officially declared that she took her own life, and that was that. It would seem that Kate Morgan, much like us, is unable to move on from this case, as she's said to still inhabit the Del Coronado to this very day around her former room, which has now been renamed room 3327. Guests report hearing all sorts of bizarre sounds: screaming, crying, wailing, laughing, all while staying in the room, reporting erratic and chaotic noises pretty much all hours of the night. Weirdly too, guests claim that while staying in 3327, the temperature of the room will change in bizarre ways, as if there'll be an intense, freezing cold front that lasts for a few short minutes and dissipates, or electronics malfunctioning. And this seems made up, but I did just get a cold, shock while reading through this, so she might be in the room with us recording right now. And if you are, Kate, hope you're doing well. So is Kate's ghost still checked into the hotel, doomed to wander the property until the crime can be solved? We may never know. Number 3, the Black Monk. Our next story is going to take us down to England yet again, this time in lovely Yorkshire. The scene was 1966. The Pritchard family lived quietly and under the radar, certainly expecting no trouble and definitely not expecting to be haunted. They just moved into their new house and were settling in when they started to notice some odd, troubling things, all the usual signs of a paranormal haunting. Strange scratches, strange noises at all hours of the night, furniture shifting around. Those sound like the telltale symptoms of a poltergeist to me. They assumed it might just have been something natural because they've never seen a movie in their life, I guess. The mind just never wants to assume it's ghosts. It was as they were approaching a year of living in that new estate that the Pritchards truly became aware of what they had inadvertently welcomed into their lives. It seemed as if whatever entity that was haunting the Pritchard house had a keen interest in the family's younger members, primarily the young student Diane. On one occasion, she claims she felt herself being dragged across the hallway by her neck, and she even showed welts and bruises all over her neck afterwards. A red handprint was burned around her throat. Foregoing subtlety at this point, this is when the entity started to make itself manifest to the family, apparating as a dark-robed, hovering being that would appear at the family's beds during the middle of the night. Very ominous. A paranormal investigation was then called and found to be inconclusive. As soon as the investigators came, the haunting seemed to slow down, similar to what had happened in the South Shields case. Ghosts are just cowards as soon as you tell on them, eh? It seemed the Pritchard family had found peace, but the investigator involved was still bothered and continued to research independently, and discovered that the Pritchard estate was built upon the former grounds of a medieval rectory, and across the street from an old gallows where people used to hang out. After a little digging, he learned that one of the prisoners sentenced to death there was an old monk. The investigator suggested this monk's malevolent spirit was the evil entity that they saw wrapped in black, dubbing him the Black Monk. And from here, the case became a legend, eventually being made into a movie called When the Lights Go Out. Number 2, Esther Cox. Coming up next is going to be the story of Esther Cox and the haunting of Amherst in Nova Scotia. It's a particularly famous Canadian ghost story, eh? It's sometimes referred to as the Great Amherst Mystery, and it's plagued and piqued the curiosity of paranormal enthusiasts for years the world over. In the late 1870s, Esther Cox was living at her sister's house alongside her brother-in-law and their children. At some point during 1878, Esther was attacked by a male friend who had tried to take advantage of her, leading to a rapid decline in Esther's mental health and emotional distress. And shortly thereafter, Esther's condition would be made infinitely worsened by the strange paranormal experiences that began to manifest on the Amherst property. The Cox family would report strange noises all throughout the night, and Esther's body began to swell as she alternated between impossibly high fevers and deathly low chills. And shortly after this was when objects around the house would be reported moving. Oh, that's it. That's the telltale sign of a poltergeist. A little aside, guys, if you ever see your table moving across your living room, call the Ghostbusters right away. The family doctor who was visiting the Cox household claims that he once saw the words, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill," written on the wall by the headboard. He tried to sedate her, but discovered that it really didn't do much to stop supernatural doings. Stressed and out of options, Esther thought that moving houses might be enough to stop the curse. But sadly, whatever is haunting her had their hooks in deep, as the ghosts would follow Esther through every house she moved to. Evidently, the spirits found this greatly offensive, as one of the houses Esther would move to would burn down while she was staying at it, resulting in Esther's arrest for arson and eventual conviction. Esther pleaded that she was innocent, and even witnesses backed up this, saying that everything Esther had been claiming had occurred as she'd said. But the old "a ghost did it" is an argument that rarely holds up in court, and Esther spent a year inside a cell. She was released in 1879 and would find a husband and raise a few children, seemingly free from the curse that once sought out to destroy her life. And number 1, Honest Abe. Would you believe that one of the most famous and most reported ghosts in American history is none other than the great emancipator himself, Abraham Abraham Lincoln. Honestly, Honest Abe gets seen more than just about any other ghost. Since his assassination, there have been numerous sightings of undead Abe wandering through the halls of the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt of the Beatles fame kept her study in what was formerly Lincoln's bedroom, pretty much just asking to bump into a ghostly stovepipe hat if you move into his bedroom. Roosevelt claimed that over the years she lived there, she could feel his presence and would sometimes see apparitions of him out of the corner of her eye. And while her husband was president, a number of other sightings would occur. A young clerk claimed that he saw Lincoln's spitting image, clear as day, sitting on the foot of a bed polishing his boots. On a visit from the Netherlands, Queen Wilhelmina claims that when she was spending a night inside the White House, she was visited by Lincoln's ghost knocking on her door. Calvin Coolidge's wife claims to have seen her on more than one occasion as well. First ladies were really out there seeing Lincoln. Claims that she saw him with his arms clasped behind his back, lost in thought looking out into the Potomac River. Wise. Winston Churchill had said that during the Second World War, he felt like he could see Lincoln's ghost coming to when the country needed him the most, and he also shared the most direct encounter and probably the funniest one. Now, Churchill used to love to relax by taking a long hot bath while enjoying a cigar. On one occasion, he says he stepped out of the bath, took a cigar, and walked into his bedroom and saw a man standing in the bedroom already, giving him quite a shock. He said when he saw the man's face, he laughed and said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You have me at a disadvantage." He claims he saw Lincoln chuckle wryly, then disappear. Presidents Truman, Roosevelt, and Hoover have all claimed to have seen inexplicable things around the White House, claiming they were all signs of Lincoln. In the last few decades, however, reportings of sightings of old Abraham Lincoln have calmed significantly. Perhaps he's finally been able to move on, or perhaps he's just very slowly checking out the rest of Washington, D.C. There's a whole lot of tourist spots and monuments to work through, and maybe he just got really caught up on the White House tour. He's got all the time in the world now to check them all out.
Kicking off our list, we have Claude Monet in 5th place. Yep, the famed artist himself. If you're not familiar with his work, I'd recommend looking up Impression Sunrise, which is the painting that gave the name to the French Impressionism art movement, or his Water Lily series. Most of his work is made up of stunning landscapes, but I think Woman with a Parasol is my personal favorite of his. But you all came here for a ghosty moment, not for me to wax poetic about art, so let's hop into it. In 2015, the Cleveland Museum of Art was installing a new temporary exhibit from the Royal Academy of Arts in London titled Painting the Modern Garden, Monet to Matisse. The director of architecture was taking photographs to make sure everything looked, according to plan, when she noticed a figure showing up on an empty balcony. The photo in question shows a man with a long white beard, sporting a hat like one Monet was fond of wearing, and looking very much like the artist who was fond of painting his gardens at Giverny. Oh, forgot to mention, Monet was a very passionate horticulturalist on top of being a fantastic painter. The public communications associate who made a public statement on the photograph, Kelly Notaro, has claimed time and time again that the photo is not a hoax, not retouched in any way, and that many more sightings of Monet have been reported since by guests visiting the exhibit. The museum is home to other ghosties as well, with stories told of a little boy running through the gallery dressed in fashions from 1916 and a man in gray staring at the portrait of Jean Gabriel before disappearing into it. Night guards have reported their flashlights flickering on and off in the West Wing, and there's a mirror where visitors report seeing a man standing, but when they turn around, no one's there. Fascinating to me that Monet chose a small museum in Cleveland to appear in, and not the museum in Paris that's, dedicated to only his art. Maybe he felt cozy amongst all the other ghosts. Or perhaps he's traveling the world to make sure his art is safe? Let me know in the comments what you think. In 4th place, we have the Grey Lady of Hampton Court Palace. I guess I should probably introduce her formally to begin with, Dame Sybil Penn. She was a servant at Hampton Court to 4 Tudor monarchs, being the nurse of Prince Edward and also Elizabeth I, nursing her through smallpox before succumbing to it herself in 1562. Sightings of her ghost began being reported in 1829, when the church of the palace was rebuilt and her tomb was moved. I'd probably be ticked as well if I had been resting for that long and then was disturbed. I'm pretty cranky as a person if you wake me up from a deep sleep. Trust me. Once upon a time, I accidentally roared at a friend who was trying to wake me up. Not my finest moment. Anywho, soon after being so rudely disturbed from her grave, strange noises of a person working a spinning wheel were heard through a wall at Hampton Court, which led to the discovery of a previously unknown chamber containing an antique spinning wheel. My inner fairy tale nerd is screaming right now about Charles Perrault. Don't mind me. The photograph we're specifically discussing today was taken in 2015 by Holly Hampshire, age 12, who thought she was taking, a fairly routine picture of her cousin Brooke McGee, also 12, during a day out at the 16th century home while in the King's apartments. Just gotta capture those selfies. The girls didn't realize what they had encountered at the time and only made the discovery when looking through their photos a day later. Okay, now before anyone calls bull on this, it's pretty dang realistic. I know I still haven't looked through every photo I took on my most recent vacation, and those photos are almost a week old now. The photograph shows a tall woman with dark flowing hair, cloaked in a full-length black and gray gown. This is the only time someone has been able to successfully capture her on camera. She's been spotted many times over the years. Just don't confuse her with any of Henry VIII's wives, since they're also quite fond of haunting the place on a regular basis, with Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard being the most commonly spotted. Jane can be found on the Silver Stick Stairs, which once led to the room where she met her unfortunate end after giving birth to the perfect heir, while wild child Catherine can be heard screaming through the haunted gallery, where it's believed that she broke free of her guards after her initial arrest in a failed attempt to reach her husband to plead for her life. Hey, maybe the Now Museum should play host to a touring cast of 6 to see what'll happen. I'd be willing to fly out for that. In third place, we have the Brown Lady. I swear this isn't going to turn into a list of spooky ladies identified by the color of their gowns. I promise. According to legend, the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall is the ghost of Dorothy Walpole, the sister of Robert Walpole, who is generally regarded as the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. She was the second wife of Charles Townshend, who was notorious for his violent temper. The story says that when Charles discovered that his wife had committed adultery with Lord Wharton, he punished her by locking her in her rooms in the family home, which is, you guessed it, Raynham Hall. She remained there until her death in 1726 from smallpox. The first recorded claim of a sighting of the ghost was by Lucia C. Stone during a gathering at Christmas of 1835 when she observed the Brown Lady because of the dated dress she wore. The following evening, another guest claimed to have seen the Brown Lady again, later reporting that on this occasion he was drawn to the specter's empty eye sockets, which were dark in the glowing face. These sightings led to some staff permanently leaving Raynham Hall, and you know what? Valid. The next reported sighting was made in 1836 by Captain Frederick Marriott, a good friend of Charles Dickens and the author of a series of popular sea novels. It is said that Frederick specifically requested that he spend the night in the most haunted room of Raynham Hall to prove his theory that the haunting was caused by local smugglers to keep people away from the area, and not by an actual ghost. The first 2 nights he slept with a personal safety bang-bang device under his pillow and encountered nothing. If you didn't get what I'm referring to, just ask someone in the comments. On the third night, his final evening, 2 young men knocked at his door very late at night as he was undressing to go to bed and asked him to step over to their room at the other end of the corridor and give them his opinion on a collector's item that had just arrived. As they were leaving the room, he brought his personal safety device, joking that it was in case he met the Brown Lady. When the inspection of the item was over, the young men declared that they would accompany him back, joking yet again about the Brown Lady. And this is where I warn y'all, if you tempt fate, fate will deliver. The corridor was long and dark, since the lights had already been extinguished by that point in the night, but as the group reached the middle of the corridor, they saw the glimmer of a lamp coming towards them from the other end, and assumed it was from one of the women in the home visiting a nursery. For context, the bedroom doors in that corridor faced each other, and each room had a double door with a space between, as is the case in many old-fashioned homes. Frederick felt uncomfortable being undressed around women, so out of modesty, slipped within one of the outer doors with the guys, in order to conceal himself until the lady should have passed by. As my roomie would say, what a distinguished gentleman. He watched her approaching nearer and nearer through the crack of the door until she was close enough for him to distinguish the colors and style of her outfit, and he recognized the figure as the Brown Lady. He had his finger on the trigger of his device and was about to demand that the ghost stop and give the reason for its presence there when the figure halted of its own accord before the door, and while holding the lighted lamp she carried to her features, grinned in a malicious and diabolical manner at him. Ooh la la. This act infuriated Frederick, prompting him to leap into the corridor and discharge the device in her face. The figure instantly disappeared in the tiny, kaboom, passed through the outer door of the room on the opposite side of the corridor and lodged in the panel of the inner one. Frederick never attempted to interfere again, so I'll give him a common sense point for that. The Brown Lady was caught on camera on September 19th of 1936 when Captain Hubert C. Provand, a London-based photographer working for Country Life magazine, and his assistant, Indre Shira, were taking photographs of Raynham Hall for an article. They claimed that they had already taken a photograph of the hall's main staircase and were setting up to take a second when Indre saw a vapory form slowly taking on the appearance of a woman moving down the stairs towards them. Captain Hubert quickly took the cap off the lens while Indre pressed the trigger to activate the camera's flash. Later, when the negative was developed, the now famous image of the Brown Lady was revealed. The ghostly experience and photograph of the Brown Lady was published in Country Life magazine on December 26th of 1936, January 4th, 1937 edition of Life magazine. In second place, we have a photo of John Defeo. Now y'all know how much I love talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren's cases, so this should come as a shock to no one. If anyone needs a quick briefing on the Amityville Horror House and not the movie, here goes it. On November 13th of 1974, during the very early morning hours, Ronald Defeo Jr. ended his entire family and claimed that the demonic voices told him to do it. I'm talking both parents and 4 siblings. Look, I can't say that I've never joked about ending family members when I'm frustrated, but this is a bit too extreme for my liking. Oh, and about a year after that slaughter, a new family moved into the home, but fled after just 28 days, claiming it was haunted beyond any way to live in it, describing slime oozing from the walls, windows that would suddenly shatter, instances of levitation, and more. I'd be here for like an hour if I went into full detail. The image I'd like to highlight today was captured by Gene Campbell, a professional photographer who was part of the team who worked with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were called in by the Lutz family during the horrors they experienced while, still trying to live in the home. Gene had set up an automatic camera that took infrared pictures to capture the second floor landing during the night. It features what appears to be a young boy with white eyes, believed to be John, who is peeking out of a doorway. George Lutz revealed the Amityville ghost boy photo. George Lutz revealed this photo on the Merv Griffin show back in 1979, 3 years after it was taken. In first place, we have Mary Lee of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. In the early 1900s, the warm, wet weather of Kentucky was the perfect breeding ground for tuberculosis, pushing all of the local hospitals' capacities way past their breaking point. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium first opened its doors on July 26 of 1910 as a 2-story wooden structure built to house about 50 patients, but in October of 1926, the hospital had expanded to a 400-bed capacity to accommodate a continual influx of patients as a now 5-story facility. The sanatorium first opened in the midst of a widespread epidemic, and we all know how epidemics and pandemics go, right? Because of the highly contagious nature of the disease, extreme quarantine measures were required for patients and staff alike, meaning Waverly Hills had to function as an isolated island. The self-sufficient facility produced its own food, raised animals, and ran a functioning post office. Also featured a 500-foot-long tunnel that traveled from the first floor of the building to the bottom of the hill. Supplies could be brought in from the bottom, and the countless bodies of deceased patients were discreetly removed from the top. With the eventual introduction of a vaccine, case numbers plummeted, and in 1961 the sanatorium was officially closed, but the pain and suffering of so many souls has left a permanent mark upon the site, and that's where we come in. The photo in question was taken on September 10th of 2006 by Tom Halstead during an overnight investigation of the facility by Missouri Paranormal Research on the 4th floor of the main hospital building at around 7 a.m. If you'd like me to be technical about it, the camera used was a Pentax K1000 35mm film camera with a ProMaster 56000 extendable flash. Black and white 400 ISO film was used, and according to data provided, the camera settings were at about 1/60th of a second speed with an f-stop of 5.6. As one can see, on the right of the frame there appears to be the apparition of a young woman with dark hair and a white nightgown or dress. With the death toll from the institution being well into the thousands, one could worry that she would never be identified. But we do have a lead. She is believed to be a young girl named Mary Lee, based on a photograph that was found of a similar looking girl signed Love Mary Lee on the back. One source claims that she is the legendary nurse who allegedly went the way of the rope necklace in room 502 after learning she was pregnant by a doctor and had tuberculosis. If you visit the sanatorium today for one of their ghost walks, you'll be sure to encounter her amongst the spooky residents that never left.